Good evening and welcome to Novara Live. My name's Stephen Methven, and let me begin by really apologizing for being a little bit late this evening. But the thing you need to know is that every single person in this room has had only a few hours sleep in the last 48 hours. And that's all to do with the flotilla, its interception. That's going to be our top story tonight, of course. So we're a little bit under par, but I feel like we got there in the end. Anyway, I'm joined tonight by Dalia Gebrial. Dalia, how are you?
I'm doing okay for completely unrelated reasons. I have also had tech issues, which means that I'm not using my proper professional camera, but my kind of shitty webcam. So apologies for that. I'm going to try and fix it throughout the show. But yeah, the tech gods are not looking at us kindly today.
Well, you look amazing as ever, Dalia, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. Coming up tonight, world leaders react to the illegal interception of the Global Sumud Flotilla. Protests erupt across the globe in solidarity with the activists now detained by Israel. We speak to a close friend of Novara's, Kieran Andreou, who is in Israeli custody as we speak. And the latest on that horrific attack that has killed at least 2 people at a Manchester synagogue. Now, if you would like to support our work, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. And please, as always, do make sure to let me know your comments in the YouTube chat, or you can always tweet at us on the hashtag Novara Live. The Israeli military illegally intercepted the Global Sumud Flotilla last night when the vessels in the convoy were a mere 75 miles from the coast of Gaza, but still firmly in international waters. Earlier today, a military ship reportedly carrying the flotilla members apprehended overnight was seen sailing into Ashdod port in Israel. That's also the port where captives from previous interceptions have been taken, where in the past they have been given the choice to self-deport or face detention until being seen before a special court that can order deportations. Dalia, the Palestinian legal charity, has issued this statement on the treatment of some of those in Israeli detention. Following the illegal interception of dozens of ships of the Global Sumud Flotilla last night and earlier today, Dalia has received phone calls from the participants reporting that immigration authorities have already begun conducting hearings on their deportation and detention orders in the Ashdod port. These proceedings were initiated without prior notice to their lawyers and while denying participants access to legal counsel. This constitutes a grave violation of due process and a denial of the participants' fundamental rights. But those on board, nearly 500 people representing 44 countries around the globe, didn't simply hand themselves over, even as the Israeli military turned to increasingly heavy-handed torture techniques to break their spirits. And it seems that one ship even evaded capture, perhaps, potentially breaking the naval siege of Gaza and marking the first time anyone has achieved such a feat since the blockade began in 2009. So on Tuesday night, the flotilla passed the orange line. That's the imaginary line with absolutely zero legal status, beyond which previous boats trying to break the siege have been intercepted by Israel, around 150 nautical miles from Gaza. But it wasn't until around 7:30 last night that Israeli ships began to surround the flotilla, around 80 miles from the enclave. Speaking from his boat, the Adara, Novara Media's Kieran Andreou streamed this report of the build-up to the interceptions.
So if you're just joining, we are being intercepted by Israel. Intercepted is a bit of a euphemism as far as I'm concerned. There's a drone overhead. Yeah.
Is it very far away?
Okay. That's a drone nearby, not right over our heads, but it could come here. It's not very far. So we've got one visible naval vessel behind us, intercepting Alma. It's also coming close to us. And we have a drone not far from us overhead. Interception is a euphemism. It's kidnapping. It's fucking piracy, obviously. Who the fuck do they think they are? We're in international waters.
Now, you can't see Kieran in that video, and that's because for safety, people stopped using torches and flashlights when the trigger-happy Israeli military were near. The lead boats of the flotilla, Alma and Sirius, were first to be boarded. What you're seeing here is the interception of Alma with interception of Album with the boat's crew readying themselves for kidnap by the Israeli state. Footage later released by the Israeli military shows Greta Thunberg, who had been sailing on Alma, in their captivity. She's handed a bottle of water and her jacket, as well as her now iconic frog hat. This one apparently hand-knitted by a supporter in Tunisia after the one she wore the last time she faced the IDF was lost at sea. On board the Adara, Kieran Andreou continued to give us a blow-by-blow account of the interception of that vessel, right up to the moment he threw his phone into the sea just before 10 p.m. local time.
Can you hear that and can you see that? It's firing liquid at us. It's firing some kind of liquid at us. We don't know what it is. They're shouting stuff in Hebrew. Shouting stuff in Hebrew. Firing a very, very bright light at us. And they're firing water. We can see soldiers now at the back. See soldiers at the back there. So I would say that it's almost certain that we're being boarded, guys. Almost certain that we're being boarded here.
They're speaking Spanish. They say that if we follow, nothing will happen.
Okay, they're instructing us that if we follow their rules, nothing will happen to us. So we are being encircled, we're being circled by this one vehicle, this large vehicle. Hard to give you a sense of how big and imposing it is. It's coming round my side now. What are we doing? Say hands up.
Hands up, hands up.
Hands up, everybody. Can you put your fucking hands up, please? Hands up, every last person.
Okay, phones on the water, please.
Phones in the water, please. Phones in the water. That was the last we heard from Kieran, and the last we expect to hear from him for some time as he undergoes detention and processing in Israel. And of course, we don't know what that's going to be like. It's this moment where, for the first time in this journey, Kieran is completely out of sight for us. Can't hear anything from him. We can't get anything to him. But we're hoping that the process is quickly. We do understand that Kieran is going to sign a voluntary deportation order, a very sensible decision, I think, given that he is half Palestinian himself. Now, Kieran mentioned in that stream a liquid being sprayed on them before the Adara was boarded. According to those on some of the ships, Israel sprayed them with skunk water before boarding. That's a substance developed in Israel and regularly sprayed from water cannons aimed at Palestinians. Here's how the BBC describes it. It's a truly putrid stench. Palestinians who have been sprayed describe it as worse than raw sewage and like a mixture of excrement, noxious gas, and a decomposing donkey. The secret recipe includes yeast, baking powder, and water, which sounds innocent enough, but the scent can linger on skin and in the environment for days, sometimes longer. Now, we can't say whether it was always skunk water being sprayed, but the use of water cannons against the flotilla's pretty passive participants was relentless. Across many boats, participants were repeatedly and completely drenched, even as they sat with their hands in the air. Now, whether it was skunk or not, the intention seemed to us here in the studio, it seemed clear. The Israeli military wanted to weaken and demoralize those on board, driving them to the point of exhaustion and even potentially hypothermia. But that attempt to break the spirit of the flotilla members was in vain. This was posted by US veteran Greg Stoker, who was aboard the Awila with friend of the show, Progressive International's David Adler.
I see tomorrow. Every time I stand in front of these fucking closed doors.
Awila, which sailed under a British flag, wasn't the only ship to turn to music as an act of resistance. Sailing some way behind the Global Sumud Flotilla is another flotilla, and on board one of their ships, the Conscience, This happened while its crew members watched the interception unfold.
Ciao bella, ciao bella, ciao ciao ciao, se io muoio da partigiano, tu mi devi seppellire e seppellire la.
Now, the operation to capture all the flotilla's participants took many, many hours, with several smaller boats apparently still sailing by dawn. This was the Fair Lady, still at sea around 9 a.m. this morning, but apparently experiencing some engine problems, with a pretty exhausted-looking group still on board. Others were still being intercepted as the sun began to rise, with armed and masked soldiers seen here boarding the Oxygono to capture its 7 passengers. Information is still drifting in and the picture isn't yet completely clear, and we've had no confirmation yet that all of those on board the ships have been accounted for. However, one vessel may, and it's quite a big may, it may have smashed everybody's wildest expectations. The Sumud Flotilla tracker shows that the Mykonos appears to have made significant progress into what Israel declares a blockaded area around Gaza's coastline before it lost signal at 7 a.m. this morning. Now that's the red dot there, that square around it is the blockaded area. And well, we don't know whether that is actually, whether there are any people on that ship, whether they were taken off and it's just drifted in, or whether they have indeed managed to sail in there and then sort of lost power or something. So we don't really know what's happened there. But a boat did get into the blockaded area. And it's something that the Israeli military also kind of acknowledged, with a spokesperson saying this. The Hamas Sumud provocation is over. None of the Hamas Sumud provocation yachts has succeeded in its attempt to enter an active combat zone or breach the lawful naval blockade. Literally nobody says that blockade is lawful except for the Israelis. All the passengers are safe and in good health. They're making their way safely to Israel, from where they will be deported to Europe. One last vessel of this provocation remains at a distance. If it approaches, its attempt to enter an active combat zone and breach the blockade will also be prevented. I mean, we can see the map. We can see the tracker. We can see there is a boat in there. We don't know, of course, just yet whether somebody sailed it in there or what's happened to it, but something got through. That's for sure. Dalia, did you watch any of the stream, absolutely mammoth stream, which has been going pretty much for 48 hours, but which we had commentary on for, I don't know, more like 10 hours last night? Well, if you didn't, if you did, what do you make of all this activity, this interception that we saw last night? What were your thoughts?
I mean, it's of course incredible to watch. I mean, this is not the first time that we have had civil society flotillas like this trying to reach Gaza, because of course this is not the first time that Israel has attacked Gaza and has blocked the ability of international aid organizations to bring vital life-giving resources and aid to the Strip. But we haven't seen one on this scale. And that scale is really important for reasons that we'll discuss later on in the show. But of course, it's incredible. And, the fact that Novara is basically one of the very few media outlets to be extensively covering what is happening with this flotilla, the largest civil society flotilla to ever have happened in history, just goes to show how much of a choice it is amongst the mainstream media to disempower us by not showing us what people can achieve when they work together and they organize and strategize together. That is not considered newsworthy by mainstream media editors, because it is not the kind of political consciousness that the mainstream media is interested in fostering. They think that politics simply happens in Westminster, and that it's the role of a journalist to cozy up to politicians enough that they can get their hands on leaks and various kinds of exclusives from the inner workings of Westminster, whereas this huge expression of civil society and democracy in action is not seen apparently as the remit of British journalists today. The thing that I wanted to talk about in this story in particular, because I think it tells us a lot about not just what happens between what the Israelis do to the Palestinians, but also the ways in which colonial nation states around the world are deeply invested and it gives an explanation as to why they are deeply invested and complicit in the Israeli state. And that is through an analysis of skunk water. So we are seeing possibly, allegedly, it appears that we are seeing skunk water being used on citizens of over 40 countries on this civil society flotilla. So skunk water is an example of how the Israeli occupation of Palestinians is an issue that affects us all. It is a universally important issue of justice. And, we often quote Nelson Mandela when he says that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians. But it shows us quite a specific way in which that is true, because skunk water was developed by an Israeli firm. It was first used on demonstrators in the West Bank in 2008. And to be very clear, this is an example of an Israeli-developed chemical weapon. It is about, drenching people in a foul smell. It's used against people's homes in Palestine, which obviously destroys everything in their home. Palestinians have described this as being a humiliating ritual as well as a materially destructive ritual, degrading, a form of collective punishment. And this is a weapon and a technology of occupation and oppression that has been developed within a very specific context of the Israeli occupation of Palestinians. Because in the Palestinians, what you have is a stateless people, a people who do not have access to the kinds of rights structures that everyone else has access to, that do not have access to structures of self-defense. They do not have a state that can legally defend them and can protect them. And so you essentially have a population that is ripe for the experimentation and the development of militaristic tools, counter-insurgency tools that you cannot develop in any other context in the world, because you don't have any other country that has a kind of stateless population on its in its back garden, that it has full impunity to oppress and occupy and to basically do whatever it pleases to. And so in that context, Israel has emerged as one of the most important exporters of surveillance technology, of military technology, and of counterinsurgency technology, of which skunk water is one. And it's able to develop that because it has a stateless population in its backyard. And then those technologies that it is able to develop because of its occupation of the Palestinians, Israel then exports to nation states around the world. So we have seen, for example, US police departments have bought skunk water from this Israeli firm for use against, allegedly, Black Lives Matter protests, or African American, Black American political protests. It was used against the encampments, the university encampments within the US. So our governments rely on Israel to develop the most, what they call, cutting edge technology in defense and surveillance and counterinsurgency. They develop these tools. Our governments buy that expertise, buy those tools, and then use that in order to dispossess all of us of our civil rights, in order to crack down on all of us of our civil rights. Other examples of this include various kinds of biometric surveillance, facial recognition that is used in all of these in all protests that many of us would have attended. These have been developed by Israeli firms within the context of the occupation of the Palestinians. And now we are seeing an example of that by the alleged use of skunk water on the citizens who are coming from 40 countries, I believe, who are represented in this flotilla, in order to crack down on their civil rights and their right to express civil disobedience in this way. And the reason that I say that that is really important is not because we should be concerned about the development of these technologies because they might be used on us eventually. Even if they were only used on the Palestinians, that would be unconscionable, that would be intolerable. But it goes to show that when we talk about things like we are not free until the Palestinians are free, this is the very material way in which that is true. It's not just about a symbol. It's not just about, the Palestinians being a symbol of the struggle against colonialism or the struggle for the universal application of human rights. They are very materially, the oppression of the Palestinians is very materially tied up in the oppression of all of us in the world, because the techniques, the state technologies that are used to disempower all of us and to attack all of our rights and to crack down on all of our ability to express, to fight for our own freedom and fight for justice in our own contexts, those tools are developed disproportionately in the context of the occupation of the Palestinians. And so these are the ways in which, when we talk about being in solidarity with the Palestinians, it's not out, or it shouldn't be at least, out of guilt or just mere sympathy, but about an understanding that our destruction and our fate is materially tied up in the destruction and the fate of the Palestinians.
I think that's a very interesting connection that you make between a kind of oppression, a violent oppression that takes place as a kind of in a sort of laboratory of Gaza, Palestine in general, and then gets exported elsewhere. And actually, I was just looking up. I remembered we did a very, very good episode of Novara FM, and it was with my colleague Rivka Brown, who spoke to Anthony Lowenstein in 2023 about his book In the Palestine Laboratory, How Israel Exports the Technology of Occupation Around the World. Well worth a listen. Now, much of your experience of the Global Sumud Flotilla, as well as ours, will have been narrated by one very familiar, very comforting and totally singular voice. This was Kieran Andreu's very first dispatch from the Global Sumud Flotilla.
Everybody, quick update from me. I'm currently in Barcelona. I'm here because on Sunday the 31st of August, I'm going to be setting sail for Gaza as part of the Global Sumud Flotilla. It's going to be the single largest attempt to break Israel's siege of Gaza ever undertaken. Without giving too much away, scores of boats will leave ports in Spain on Sunday, with dozens more expected to join from Tunis and elsewhere on the 4th of September and beyond. Hundreds of activists were chosen from 26,000 ordinary people who responded to a public call out. They're currently here in Barcelona, undergoing compulsory training alongside me, Greta Thunberg, and many, many more. We all know that genocide is taking place in Gaza. We all know that Israel is using mass starvation as a weapon of war against Palestinians. Given this context, I felt it was more important now than ever to provide coverage of the entire voyage from start to finish for Novara Media. I do, of course, also have a personal reason for wanting to take part. My Palestinian family knows what it means to live under Zionist occupation. I'm expected to spend around 14 days at sea. That's 14 days more than I've ever spent on a boat before, so wish me luck. And stay tuned, because tech permitting, I'm going to be providing daily updates across all of our channels. Thank you, and thanks for your continued support.
And daily updates, Kieran did indeed provide very good ones indeed. But of course, things got dangerous pretty quickly after an incendiary device dropped from a drone hit the family boat that Kieran was a member of at that time.
Hi everybody, sorry I didn't give you an update yesterday. It's just that the past 36 hours have been incredibly intense. But I'm really happy to report that I'm back on the family boat, the boat that was struck by the first of the two drones 2 nights ago. And the other boat that was struck by a drone was Alma, which, if you look out there, you can see is anchored very nearby. And I happen to know that Alma, like my boat, like family, has both participants and crew back on board. I think it's pretty obvious that Israel did this for 2 reasons, right? It wanted to deter the flotilla, scare us into sort of disembarking and going home. And obviously, as I say, back on board, that's failed. Completely failed in that strategy. Number 2, unfortunately, somewhat more successfully, Israel wanted to get the evacuation and ethnic cleansing of Gaza City out of the international headlines, right? This is what Israel does. It bombs countries to try and distract the fickle media from paying attention to the genocide in all of its various appalling forms. And as I say, unfortunately, the media is susceptible to that. So yeah, bomb Doha, bomb the flotilla, get the ethnic cleansing of Gaza City out of the headlines. I've done a little inspection of the ship, and I'd say that everything I've seen is consistent with what was reported by Novara, which is that the damage is ultimately superficial. So the front of the boat has kind of blackened, charred surfaces. One curious thing that one of the other participants on the boat pointed out to me is that there's plastic blinds which have melted away because of the heat. They melted because of the heat of the fire, which really does say to me that this could have been a lot worse. And it is a credit, it's a tremendous credit to the people who handled the fire, that something so ferocious was put out so quickly and that there wasn't more damage. As I say, it's on to Bizarre next, another port in Tunisia. Obviously, safeguarding, safety protocols, we have been delayed slightly, but everybody is absolutely determined to sail on from Bizarre, collect more boats in Sicily or in the sea beneath Sicily, onwards past Greece, collect more boats there, and finally to Gaza.
Kieran's reporting became most essential, as well as, in some strange way, most reassuring in the moments before Israel swept in to intercept the flotilla. But despite the anxiety and the threat of violence that surrounded him, Kieran just never lost his cool. This was his report as the Israeli gunships closed in.
So, the military vessel is circling us. Circling us. Let me see if I can show you. No movement, no.
Let this ship take over, okay?
Okay guys, we have to be really, really careful because even just flashing a light or having our phone could be seen as a provocation and they could fire on us. So we are, it's not, I'm not able to, I'm not able to. That's Alba, yeah, it's Alba. I'm not able to shine my light anymore, just so that you're all aware. So now we're in front of it and behind us. It's coming, is it? Should we? The boat is now alongside us. The boat is now alongside us.
After Kieran was apprehended by the Israeli military, he had one last message for us after his abduction.
If you're watching this video, it means that I have been kidnapped by Israel. My name is Kieran Andrew with Novara Media. I decided to sail with the Global Sumud Flotilla to report on this unprecedented attempt by people from 44 different countries to break Israel's illegal and genocidal siege of Gaza. I also have my own motivations for wanting to be here. My 6 siblings grew up in Palestine under Zionist occupation, and watching from afar in the UK, I saw how they were shot, terrorised and imprisoned simply for wanting to live on land that my family had owned for generations. I couldn't be a passive witness to Israel's atrocities any longer. As we sailed, Israel's genocide intensified with new levels of brutality enacted against the people of Gaza City. In the month that we were away, hundreds more children were slaughtered in their homes. A pregnant woman was beheaded and starving people were gunned down and murdered while waiting for aid. And so we continued through explosive and chemical attacks on our boats, to the jamming of our radio systems, to smearing us in order to lay the groundwork for violence against us. Our flotilla mission was entirely legal. It is protected under several binding instruments of international law. I therefore call on my government, Keir Starmer's government, to act now and to hold Israel to account. So I ask that you share this message and demand of our governments my safe return and the safe return of everybody else who participated in this peaceful and lawful mission to break Israel's siege of Gaza and to free Palestine. Thank you.
Absolutely, amongst the very best of us. Earlier today, I was joined by Jack, an old friend of Kieran Andrews, and I began by asking him how he first found out that Kieran would be joining the flotilla.
I was actually with Kieran when he found out that he was going to be on the boat, or at least that there was a very high likelihood that he was going to have the opportunity to do this. It didn't come as a surprise in the sense that I knew that Kieran would do this given the opportunity to do it. We all, I guess, have seen his reasons, his personal affinity for doing this, but you know, he was never gonna say no. But we were scared, and we were very kind of like, we knew we wouldn't be able to dissuade him, and we didn't really want to dissuade him, but we were very worried.
And what was it that was most worrying for you?
Well, I mean, we've all seen what's been going on over the past year, and how Israel treat journalists, how Israel are treating Palestinians. Being a journalist of Palestinian heritage, we felt that like he was going to be at risk potentially, but he told us all of the reasons why he felt that he'd be safe. He told us all of the kind of logical reasons why he felt that he was doing the right thing, but also that he would come back. I mean, we didn't really have any choice but to believe him, but you know, he's a confident guy, and he believes in himself, and he believes in the cause. So like, he was never going to not do this, and so we all kind of had to just accept that, like, you know, he would be safe, and that's the only reason why, you know, we're all okay back home. Kieran's friends, the people who love him, the people who care about him, you know, is because we have to believe that like he's gonna be okay. And up until last night, that was, you know, an incredibly scary thing. But up until last night, you know, that's been the kind of like, that's how I've been feeling throughout this whole thing. But yeah, I've been scared, and our friendship group have been very scared.
Yeah, last night was quite an extraordinary kind of, I mean, spectacle's not really the right word, but a sort of extraordinary historic moment that has been captured, and that Kieran was such an important part of as a reporter. Tell us what it was like for you to be watching those scenes unfold over the course of the night yesterday.
Yeah, I didn't want to watch it. I didn't feel like I could really sort of handle it. But then I spoke to someone about it, and they said like, I think you should, and they were right, and so I did, and I'm glad I did, because you know, the world does need to see what's happening, and it's people like Kieran and everyone else on the flotilla that are showing that. But it felt awful. It felt as though I was about to see something that I could never really unsee. And I watched it up until Kieran threw his phone in the water.
One of the things that I found, I think, most impressive about Kieran's reporting, especially in those moments where danger was so near, was that he seemed to me to be so incredibly calm and steady. And there were these moments where he just had these sort of deep sighs that expressed both a kind of anxiety about what was going on around him, but a sort of boredom with the kind of banality of the Israelis' way of going about things, you know, the kind of coming close, going away, tiring people out. Did you similarly find the style with which he managed to report this, you know, kind of profound series of events in some sense reassuring? Or what did you think of it?
I guess I'd known Kieran for 18 years now, so I know him as a very close personal friend, and he's an entertainer. Like in our group, he's an entertainer. He's a larger than life guy who'll hold court and who'll tell stories, and everyone will pay attention. So it's been strange watching the tone that he's using to report these things, because he's obviously done it in a very uncensored way in our kind of like personal space. But it's heartwarming and reassuring and funny sometimes to see him slip into his own style, his own kind of personal take on these things, which, as you know, which isn't funny, but and I know that everyone who has been following Kieran on the flotilla will know his personal reasons for going. But as a close friend of his, you know, he's always been someone who has been sympathetic to people who are oppressed, you know, not just Palestinian people, but, you know, if there's a protest, he's there. If there's a reason to stand, he stands. And so it's not surprising to me or anything like that to see him calm or composed in these situations to a certain extent. And then to another extent, my feelings are like, oh my God, my friend is there, you know, being kidnapped by the IDF, and he's saying like, sit down for fuck's sake. You know, that to me, I think only Kieran could sort of make me laugh in a situation like that, and he actually did, which is pretty weird. But I guess, like I said before, knowing that he's going to be okay because of the things that he told us before he left, and the things that he's continued to tell us while he's been away, has allowed me to watch that like that. But last night was horrific. It was really horrible to watch.
For us here as well, it was nerve-wracking. But obviously, in many ways, now is actually in some ways the scariest moment, because it's the moments where Kieran is completely out of sight. You know, we don't know exactly where he is. We think he's in Ashdod in Israel. We're hoping for a quick deportation. How are you and his other friends and family, how are you feeling about this period where he's in the hands of the Israeli state? And what are you hoping about the outcome of this?
My understanding is that Kieran has been briefed and has agreed to sign papers that will allow him the deportation papers. I don't know the exact term, and I believe he'll do that. My friends believe he'll do that. His family believe that he'll do that and be back safe soon. But yeah, this was the bit that I was dreading the most, the bit without any comms, because, you know, I have been able to be in touch with him, and I've had, you know, a few voice notes back and forth and lots of messaging back and forth on WhatsApp. Sorry about the sirens. And so there has been a level of comfort in that. And so obviously now that he's out of comms and we can't reach him and he can't reach us, that obviously heightens the fear and heightens I guess the risk, because there's no cameras on him, there's no eyes on him right now, and that is scary. But, you know, like I said, I think we're all kind of like, everyone here that loves Kieran, that cares about Kieran, that can't wait to see him again and give him a big hug, is 100% certain that what he said before he left is still true, that, you know, he is protected and he will come home.
Jack, you've made reference a couple of times now to Kieran's personal circumstances. Do you want to, like, I think the audience is generally aware of it, but do you want to elaborate on that and the reason and why that's such an impetus for him making this journey?
Journalistically, he thinks it's important. I think as a human being, he sees the vital, the mission as being vital. And I think everyone watching this does. But with Palestinian heritage, with Palestinian family, and so many of them being, you know, living under IDF law, IDF rule for their entire lives. You know, Kieran has been separated from them for many reasons. And when he's seen them, he's kind of had to, you know, listen to the harrowing tales of their lives. And then we, as, you know, as his friends, kind of like hear these things secondhand from him. I think he was excited to go. I think he was genuinely scared but excited to do something, because, you know, he has lived his life in the UK and he's done incredible things. You know, he's lived a really, really fun, exciting life, and I think that a big part of him felt a duty to his people, and I don't think he'd mind me saying that. I think he'd agree with me on that. So yeah, I think, you know, like you mentioned earlier about hearing the news about him going, there was never any part of me that was ever going to say, like, don't do this, or like, are you sure about this? It was never really that. It was more to do with, you know, just stay safe. And but we knew that if he had any opportunity to go on this mission to deliver aid to Gaza, to Palestinians, he would do it.
That was Kieran's friend Jack. Seemed a very lovely friend, Jack, who joined me earlier today. Kieran wasn't alone in leaving a message for the world after being kidnapped in an act of high seas piracy by the Israeli military.
My name is Gabrial. I'm a citizen of Sweden. If you are watching this video, I have been abducted and taken against my will by Israeli forces. Our humanitarian mission was non-violent and abiding by international law. Please tell my government to demand my and the others' immediate release.
I'm Tiago Avila. I'm a Brazilian citizen. If you're watching this video, it means our humanitarian mission to Gaza has been either intercepted or attacked by Israel, and we need your immediate support to pressure my government and other governments for the immediate release of all of our participants and for their safety. It's very important that we apply this pressure right now. Every minute counts, every second counts, and provide as well the support and the pressure to break relations with Israel. Gaza needs us more than ever, and we're counting on you.
Hello everyone, I am Ty Kiki and I'm from Ireland. If you're watching this video, I have been kidnapped by the IDF in international waters, which is completely illegal, and taken to Israel against my will. Please put pressure on the Irish government to end its complicity in the genocide in Gaza and to get me home. Free Palestine, end the genocide, Saoirse Dun Palestine.
My name is Nkosizwe Veli Lemandel, a citizen of the Republic of South Africa. I am participating in a non-violent mission on the Global Sumud Flotilla, taking humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza. If you are receiving this video, it means I have already been intercepted and abducted by the Israeli forces. I call on you as the citizens of South Africa to call on our government for my immediate release.
Dalia, there are people representing 44 countries on that flotilla. Europe, many from Europe, but many from all across the world, including the global south. Of course, there are Palestinians as well, including Kieran. What do you think all of these different people from different places are going to encounter over the next few days while in Israeli custody?
I mean, it's difficult to say, because one thing that the Israeli state has showed us over the past 2 years, and has actually showed us really over the past more than 70 years, is that there are no lines. There are no boundaries. There are no laws that they're not willing to break. There's no line that they're not willing to cross. And what the rest of the world has showed us, and when I talk about the rest of the world, I mean governments. I don't mean everyday people who have a very long history of taking actions such as these flotillas in order to express their solidarity with the Palestinians, to meet their historical responsibility to fight for the Palestinians and all colonized people. What the governments of the world has showed us is they are willing to let the Israelis do whatever it is that they want, regardless of what boundaries and laws they are breaking through. It is, of course, incredibly brave. It's incredibly moving, but it's also deeply strategic, precisely because of the way in which having a flotilla representing 40 different countries around the world essentially means that those 40 governments are now implicated, are now responsible, are now directly involved, have been pulled into being directly involved into what Israel is doing. It's not just brave, it is deeply strategic. And why is it strategic? What are the aims of the flotilla? The flotilla's first aim is, of course, to get aid to Gaza. That is, on the face of it, that is what the flotilla is for, and that is what the aim of the flotilla is. But there's also a deeper strategic goal, and that is that the 500 people on those boats, representing 40 different countries, they are trying to pull other governments into the governments of the world, the governments that they are the citizens of, into finally standing up to Israeli impunity. Because what we have to remember is that the Palestinians are a stateless people. And when you are stateless, you do not have access to the typical forms of recourse that most people in the world have access to. And you do not have a state that can represent your interests on the international stage and that can defend you from aggression. You know, we talk a lot about, does Israel have a right to defend itself? Well, the Palestinians don't even have the means to defend themselves because they don't have a military, they don't have a government, they don't have statehood that is widely recognized throughout the world. And so by having people who are the citizens of 40 different governments, knowing, you know, when they got on these boats, they knew that the likelihood was that their boats would be illegally intercepted and they would be illegally kidnapped by Israel. They knew that that was the most likely thing that was going to happen. Now, when you are a citizen of a country and you face illegal aggression from another country or from people within another country, your state has got a legal responsibility and right to take action, to protect you, to stand up to that state that is exemplifying illegal aggression towards you. For example, in Iran, you know, when British citizens, American citizens have historically been taken hostage in Iran, the governments of the US and Israel and the UK have had to engage in negotiations to hold them accountable for doing that. So by putting their bodies on the line, by putting themselves at a high risk of being illegally abducted by the Israeli state, the 500 people on these boats are basically saying, we are going to put ourselves at risk in order to force our governments to stand up to Israeli impunity, because all of the 40 governments that are represented on that boat, or whose citizens are represented on those boats, now have the legal right and obligation to defend their citizens against aggression by the Israelis. And so these people on these boats are trying to get the international governments involved and actually obligated, even though they are already obliged to at least not be complicit in a state that is at plausible risk of conducting genocide. But now they ought to be provoked into protecting their citizens from aggression, illegal aggression by a rogue state. So what I would say is the 500 people on those boats have done their part. It's now time for our governments to do their part.
That point you make about impunity is very important. I saw someone in the chat earlier saying something like, I don't like the way that the flotilla has taken attention away from Gaza. Now, of course, the whole purpose of the flotilla has been to drive eyes to Gaza, and it has done that very well. And just for this moment where there's this interaction with the Israeli state, it's felt important to us to put our eyes on the flotilla. But it's also, it's really important not to separate these things out, because the common theme here is Israeli impunity. Gaza is not the cause of Israeli impunity. It's a symptom. It's a very, very big one. But the treatment of the flotilla being attacked, kidnapped, acts of piracy in international waters with no consequences for Israel is another feature of its impunity. The two are connected. So when we cover this story, in a way, what we're covering is what's central to not only the genocide in Gaza, but rather to Israel's influence in the whole region and the way in which the wider world interacts with Israel and allows them to continue to breach international law, to commit war crimes, to commit acts of genocide itself, with total impunity. Right, so how has the world reacted to the aggressive and illegal interception of the Global Sumud Flotilla by Israel? Well, ordinary people are not taking it sitting down. Protests broke out spontaneously in cities around the world, with more planned for today and this weekend. In Turkey, protesters gathered outside both the US and Israeli embassies to demonstrate against the interception of the flotilla immediately after it began. Hundreds of people outside the two consulates chanted slogans in support of Palestinians and the Global Sumud Flotilla. Meanwhile, in Greece, people gathered in front of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to voice their objection to the interception of the humanitarian mission. Demonstrators also blocked traffic in the streets of Milan on Wednesday night after reports that the International Aid Flotilla for Gaza had been intercepted by Israeli military personnel. And in Naples, protesters physically stopped the trains from running. Protesters also marched in Buenos Aires, demanding the release of activists detained by Israeli forces after their humanitarian flotilla was intercepted in the Mediterranean. And in London, protesters immediately gathered in Piccadilly Circus, where they set off fireworks and called on Prime Minister Keir Starmer to get his act together. Today, thousands of students have marched out of classrooms and off university campuses across Spain to protest the blocking of aid to Gaza and the interception of the flotilla. In Mexico, there have been protests too, with those turning out in Mexico City calling for the state to break ties with Israel and chanting, "It's not a war, it's a genocide." And in Kuala Lumpur, there were protests against the interception of the flotilla too, with hundreds marching to the US Embassy to make their anger heard. That is literally just a handful of the protests we've seen today and last night. There were more in France, Belgium, and Germany, other places as well. Meanwhile, in Italy, the unions have got involved. Again, Italy's Unione Sindacale di Base has called for a general strike on Friday, the 3rd of October, in solidarity with the Global Sumud Flotilla and calling out Israel's repeated failures to obey international law. The threat of that strike even prompted a comment from Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, who said this: "I would have expected that at least on such an important issue, they would not have called a general strike on a Friday, because a long weekend and revolution don't go together." That is kind of funny, but I continue to believe that all of this brings no benefit to the people of Palestine. On the other hand, it seems to me that it will bring many inconveniences to the Italian people. I say it's kind of funny. It is funny, but it's also like a remark you hear all the time. It has absolutely no point except to be a little bit spiky. Some other political responses have been of a similar tone to Meloni's. The British government has said it is very concerned, and it's told Israel, politely, I'm sure, that it expects the situation to be resolved peacefully and in line with international law. My guys, it's already out of line with international law. But other leaders have, led. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has specifically called the attacks on the flotilla a violation of international law, and he has said the country will consider any type of action to protect its citizens. But it was Colombia's President, Gustavo Petro, who took the strongest line of all, saying this: "If this information is true, the interception, there is a new international crime by Netanyahu. 2 Colombian citizens who were participating in humanitarian solidarity activities with Palestine have been detained in international waters. The Foreign Ministry must make all the necessary demands, including in the Israeli courts. I invite international lawyers to serve Colombia alongside our lawyers. The free trade agreement with Israel is immediately denounced. The entire Israeli diplomatic delegation leaves Colombia." Dalia, what do you make of those responses? Firstly, the protests that we're seeing in the streets. There's another one being organized in Parliament Square this evening, I believe. Maybe no, tomorrow evening, I think. No, this evening. Sorry, I'm getting the dates confused. And then those leaders.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what we want to see, and I think we have seen such sustained civil society organizing around Palestine over the past 2 years, whether it's workers mobilizing at different points of production, whether it's consumer boycotts, whether it's protests. And I think we have all learned a really important lesson about how we are all far less free than we maybe thought we were, because we are pulling on every lever of civil society to try and stop a genocide from, not just our own organizing, but even, using the law. And we have still not been able to stop a genocide in live as it's happening live in front of us. And I think we've all had to really ask ourselves, are we free? Do we live in a democracy if we are unable to stop our name, to stop a genocide happening in our name and with our tax money? I think it's been it's been a radicalizing process, I think, for many people across, especially the West, who I think were living in a little bit of a delusion about how free and democratic the society that they live in is. Things like very important things like free speech have been reduced to comical ideas and so separated from what they really mean, and the way that civil society has organized around Palestine and the way they have been cracked down on as a result has showed us that, you know, we've allowed a lot of these things such as democracy and free speech to become completely emptied of their meaning and their power. But I think what I would like to talk about is Italy and the general strike, because I've seen a lot of people on social media saying, you know, why can't we in Britain do a general strike? You know, where are the unions? And I think that's a really important question, because I don't think that it's that rank and file union members or even many union leaders are not concerned about what is happening in Palestine and don't want to take action regarding what is happening in Palestine. What I think it shows is that the destruction of the labor movement in this country has not just been about attacking us as workers and about destroying our ability to organize for a better economic condition, but also the destruction of the unions is very much about disempowering us as citizens and as political agents. It's a political as well as an economic attack, because essentially a general strike is very difficult to organize in this country because, in a sense, and there's a great article by Polly on the Novara Media website about, you know, why can't there be a general strike in the UK? And that's because a general strike is not legal in the UK. You know, if a union leader was to come out and call for a general strike, or if several union leaders were to call for a general strike, they would technically be breaking the law. And this was very much part of a broader assault on the labor movement as a political force and as democratic expression of civil society that starts with Thatcherism and has continued today. And it happens in many forms. And what it tries to do is it tries to narrow the idea of what a union is, what a union should do, into very, very, very limited circumstances. And, you know, a kind of flagship part of this is the 1982 Employment Act, which changed the terminology of the role and the definition of a union from being between employers and workers to being between workers and their employers. And what that did is that basically meant that the remit of a union was to address very specific labor disputes around very specific issues between workers and individual employers. So it removed, for example, the ability of unions within the same sector, even, you know, the removal of sectoral bargaining. It meant that unions within a sector or workers within a sector were no longer able to organize as workers within a sector, but could only organize against individual employers. And of course, it meant that workers across different sectors in the UK could not organize and strike together as a collective. It had to be a coordination of individual groups of workers against their employers. And what that did is it broke the voice of workers as a political voice. And it very much limited what we can understand and what our avenues of democratic expression and power could be. Because democracy is, of course, not just voting in an election every 5 years. Labor movement, the labor unions were a really important institution of democracy because it was a place where workers could come together and democratically decide not only on what their position on different issues are, but also could have access to a lever of power to translate that opinion or view into actual material power through democratic means. And so this is where, you know, the kind of our power as workers and the power of the unions and our power to, you know, defeat a colonial state and our government's complicity in a colonial occupation are really heavily intertwined, because the destruction of our labor movement, the destruction of our unions, we are now seeing how that destruction, which began in the 1980s, has been one of many processes that have culminated in us being unable to take action against a colonial apartheid state, despite the fact that the vast majority of us are against that colonial apartheid state. And so to me, this is a really, really instructive way of showing how within Britain, our rights as workers and our rights as political agents are so deeply intertwined, and how the attack on our unions as institutions was also about disempowering us as political actors in so many other ways, not just in defending our rights as workers, but it was an attack on our democratic voice overall.
Police are describing an attack on a synagogue near Manchester as a terrorist attack. 2 people have been killed in a knife and car attack at the Heaton Park Hebrew Congregation Synagogue at around 9:15 this morning. The attack took place on Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. Head of Greater Manchester Police Chief Constable Stephen Watson gave the details of the attack.
We can confirm that 2 members of our Jewish community have sadly died as a result of this attack. Following a rapid response, armed officers from Greater Manchester Police intercepted the offender, and he was fatally shot by officers within 7 minutes of the original call. 4 further people remain in hospital, having suffered a variety of serious injuries, and their treatment is ongoing, and our thoughts are with them and their families.
The attacker in this truly terrible crime has not been named, but this image has been published by several papers. It's said to have been taken shortly before the attack, and the attacker appears to be wearing a belt. Greater Manchester Police Chief Constable Stephen Watson had more details on that.
He was wearing about his body a vest which had the appearance of an explosive device. There were a large number of worshippers attending the synagogue at the time of this attack, but thanks to the immediate bravery of security staff and the worshippers inside, as well as the fast response of the police, the attacker was prevented from gaining access. All those inside were safely contained until police were able to confirm that it was safe to leave the premises.
Police later confirmed that the device was, quote, not viable. There have now also been 2 additional arrests, and counter-terror police say they believe they have established the identity of the attacker. This was Prime Minister Keir Starmer speaking after the attack.
The attack in Manchester this morning is absolutely shocking, and all of our thoughts are with those affected. I'm on my way back to London. When I arrive, I will chair an emergency COBRA meeting. I'm already able to say that additional police assets are being deployed to synagogues across the country, and we will do everything to keep our Jewish community safe. I've spoken to Mark Gardner of the CST and Andy Burnham, Mayor of Manchester, and I want to thank the emergency services for the speed of their response.
That emergency COBRA meeting to decide whether to raise the threat level in the UK concluded shortly before we went on air. Now, this vile attack on Jewish worshippers at a synagogue during their holiest of days is the latest in a rise of religion-based or religious hate crimes. Attacks on Jewish people or people perceived to be Jewish in the UK have almost doubled since Israel's assault on Gaza began almost 2 years ago, rising from around 1,500 per year in 2023 to over 3,000 in 2024. Attacks on Muslims or people perceived to be Muslim have also risen, though not by as much, going from around 3,500 per year in 2023 to nearly 4,000 in 2024. Dalia, we don't have a lot of details on this story, but I think it's safe to say this is clearly an anti-Semitic attack. It took place at a synagogue during Yom Kippur while there were people there worshipping. There's no beating around the bush, and there's also no beating around the bush about the fact that anti-Semitic attacks have increased dramatically since the war in Gaza began. What do we say about this increase in religious hate crimes in the UK?
It's disgusting, the attack that we saw today. I woke up this morning to it, and I was shocked. I was disgusted, and it's very clear. I mean, we obviously don't know that much yet, But when you attack people when you attack people in a place of worship that a community relies on, there is no reason to believe that it wasn't an attack on that community specifically. So I'm very sure that this was motivated by anti-Semitism, because it took place in a synagogue on one of the holiest days in the Jewish calendar. So we have to call it as it is. It was an anti-Semitic attack. And I think that what it shows about the moment that we're in is that we are in a highly identitarian moment. There's an irony there, because, there's this sense of, that we're in the midst of this backlash against identity politics, but identitarianism is at an all-time high. We are seeing the exploitation and the heightening of identitarian rhetoric at the highest levels of government across so many different contexts. And it feels like now we are in a moment where more than at least I can remember in recent memory, you are more likely to face street level violence based on who you are than we have been in a very long time. And that's a really, really scary place to be. It's a place we have been before historically in this country. Of course, the Battle of Cable Street, the various racist riots and confrontations that took place throughout the 70s and 80s. We can beat this again. I do believe that. I have to believe that in order to get up in the morning and go about my day. But we are back in that time. We are back in that in that moment. And we have to be very serious about that. And we have to be very serious about how we keep one another safe in that context. It's also not a surprise to me that Islamophobia and anti-Semitism are both on the rise, because these are two forms of racism that have a deeply intertwined history. And when they tend to be on the rise together, they tend to increase together. They are deeply interlinked. They are both a form of, religious discrimination that nonetheless is heavily racialized in many ways, and has been so historically, particularly within Europe. I often say, I teach about kind of race and early modern Europe, and I often say that the twin racisms that birthed modern concepts of Europe are Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. It is really deeply ingrained and deeply intertwined with one another. And, that's why so many of us often make the point at a time when Jewish and Muslim communities are being pitted against one another. We often, those of us who know our history and who, have an anti-racist politics, say that the safety of Jews and the safety of Muslims is very, very connected. And we can see that from the data that you showed in that segment. And we can see it through the fact that, these are the communities that are facing, that are feeling more and more unsafe in this moment that we are in of heightened street level, identity-based, racist, prejudiced violence. It's a horrible historical moment to be living through. But it's a historical moment that we have lived through and defeated historically. And as I said, in order to be able to get up and go about my day every morning, I have to believe that we can defeat it again.
Dalia, thank you very much for joining me tonight.
Thanks for having me, Stephen.
And thank you everyone for tuning in. We're going to be back tomorrow at 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.